So we can speak.
I think we must be very nearly at 9 o'clock. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
You can. Good. Perfect. Okay, let's kick off. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Richard Knott. I'm an independent commissioner, and in this instance I've been appointed by Taronga City Council to hear and determine an application by Evans Road Community Church for a limited notified resource consent application to extend the Evans Road Community Church at 30 Evans Road, Papamoa. So first off, just to see who else is in the room, but first off, if I could ask Sarah Drummond to, she's probably spoken to most of you already, I expect, but if Sarah could just let everyone know where she is and who she is, because she's here to support us today.
Thank you, Sue. I'm Sarah Drummond, I'm the committee advisor today. This is Coral here, who's very kindly helping me. I'm only in week 2, so please excuse any slight glitches. Just go over a couple of bits of safety protocol. In the event we have to evacuate the building, the nearest exit is the stairwell to the lifts. And the point for everybody meeting is in the car park at the back of the library. Obviously, we are running in a COVID environment, so you would have scanned in and come in as you came through with your passes and scanning in. With the new system, we will need to scan in and out with your COVID tracking scanner if you do come in and out of the building. Obviously, if we can maintain social distancing, there's lots of hand sanitizer about, so please feel free to use it. I'll just be up the front there. Anybody that needs anything, either online or in the room, just wave or poke me or something like that. And we'll do our best to help today. If everyone could just make sure that their cell phones are please off. For those that are coming in online, unless you're actually speaking, because we can have a bit of feedback, it would be good if we could just have everybody muted, and if you're not speaking, sometimes it helps to not have your camera running either until you're actually answering questions. Anything else, please don't hesitate to let me know.
When people are speaking, can they use the microphone?
Yes, if you could just turn your mics on and off. If there's any feedback issues, we'll pop up and deal to those. If you're not hearing very well at the back, please let us know and we'll do the best we can to run a bit more sound for you. Thank you, Sue.
Great, thank you. So yeah, just to underline that issue about cameras, I think when we're sort of having general discussions like this, if anyone wants to have their camera on, that's fine. But as we move through the applicant's case and the hearing proper, as it were, if people who aren't presenting could have their cameras off, that's great. Only selfishly, I've got my monitor split with the things I'm reading on one side and the picture of you all on the other, and you'll get a bit too small if we have too many cameras on. So yeah, that's really probably the most just the general introductions. Just to say that clearly, because we're online and in split locations, some people in the council chamber and some people you know, at home or in their offices, it is slightly different to a normal hearing, and I think we just cope with any issues that come up as we go forward through that. But I think just to sort of confirm, the other issue we've had is clearly because of the Auckland border, and I'm based in Auckland. I haven't been on site, and it's not a site that I know or have any knowledge of at all. Fortunately, the other week when I did a hearing in Tauranga, it happened to be a site 2 doors down from a site I'd previously visited and chaired a hearing for. So I think in this instance, having read the applicant's evidence and having read significantly the submissions, I do think that a site visit would be very much worth my while. So on that basis, I'm going to be getting up very early on the 15th, which is the first day that I'm allowed out of Auckland, and I hope that traffic will be flowing and I will be coming down for a site visit. So quite what time I'll arrive, I'm not sure, but I'll be there to have a look around the local area. And if there's anything that people want me to see in the local area, I don't know if we have submitters in the room yet. So if there's anything that people want me to see in the local area, if they can point that out to me as we go through evidence or hear submissions, and we can see whether we can accommodate that when I'm down. But as I said, I think it's unlikely that I know what time I'll be there, so I'm unlikely to be meeting people, but certainly having a good look around the local area to pick up on those issues. In preparation for the hearing, I've obviously read through the council's section 42A report, the various application documents and the evidence on behalf of the applicant, and also gone through the submissions that were made to the application. And I don't have paper copies of those, so I will be reading those from screen as we go through and picking up on my notes that I've made against those. So apologies if you at times see the side of my head. It's because I'm trying to read through those at the same time. So I think probably the next thing that would be useful from my perspective, if people could just let me know who's there and who they're representing, and that includes the submitters. So if we first go to the Ms. Ham, go to you on behalf of the applicant.
Certainly. Good morning, Vanessa Ham, solicitor for the applicant. To my left is Blair Clinch, landscape architect, and behind me Tracy Hayson, planner, and Bruce Harrison, traffic engineer. Two of my witnesses, Ian Dixon and Damien Ellerton, are appearing via Teams.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And who do we have there from the council at the moment?
Good morning, I'm Samantha Cottage. I'm an environmental planner from the Tauranga City Council. To my left, I have Bryce Phillipson, who is a senior planner, and then I have Duncan Wilson, who is our traffic specialist, and Chloe Roper, who is our noise specialist.
So I didn't catch the last name, sorry.
That's Chloe Roper, who is our noise specialist.
Yes, yeah. Great, thank you. And we do have some submitters in the room, do we, at the moment? So is that submitters at the back of the room?
Yes,
I
so
can see a vague outline of someone waving, but the light's behind you, so it's very difficult to see you back there. I wonder. I'm just trying to think about what the COVID protocol here is, but it would be quite useful. Is there a mic that could go to the back so people could introduce themselves at the back? Because I'm not going to hear people speaking at the back, but if there's are the microphones portable and they could be moved to the back of the room for people to just say who's there?
Yes,
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angela Gurnia. I'm representing myself and my husband, and my son is appearing from Auckland, so Microsoft Teams in Gurnia, and I can't see any other submitters here right now, so I'm hoping they'll turn up soon.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, submitters know there's a slot later on, but I wanted to make sure that if you were here, you could let me know, so thank you. Okay, so just for those who aren't familiar with the hearing process, and I think most in the room are, but just for those who aren't familiar, just to set out how the day works. So we first hear the case from the applicant, I then hear from the submitters, and then council come in to provide their case and also pick up any issues that have arisen through the morning to see if we can resolve and work our way through some of those. And then we have the applicant's right of reply. Following that, I decide whether I need any additional information. And once I've received that additional information, and in this case, once I've been on site, as I mentioned I would be, I will then close the hearing and prepare my decision. So, and also for those who aren't familiar with the hearing process, I'm the only person who is able to ask questions. I mean, sometimes it might be appropriate that I turn to someone beyond that person who's presenting to try and tease out an issue, but we'll see how we go. So it's a bit more awkward online, I think, than it is perhaps normally. And just from anyone in the room, is there any limitations on timing and availability, or are we all looking okay in terms of the timetable that's been circulated by council? I guess shout out if there's any issues. No one, I think, so that's good. You'll see that we've got planned breaks approximately every hour and a half. I'm quite keen to stick with that as much as we can, because I think these online hearings, you get beyond an hour and a half and concentration begins to wane a little bit. We need to get up and stretch our legs, so I'll try and stick to that as much as we can, and see how we go again with the evidence first thing. So I think we're ready to kick off. There was just one issue that I wanted to check with Ms. Pottage before I go further. There weren't any late submissions, were there? There's no mention made of late submissions.
No, none that I've seen.
No, that's what I thought. I thought they were all received in time. So I just wanted to check that. So yeah, Ms. Ham, I'm in your hands.
Thank you, sir. I have emailed a copy of my legal submissions this morning, so you hopefully have those.
I do, thank you.
There are some hard copies if you need. Submitters at the back need a copy. I understand they've been handed out, thank you. So just by way of introduction, this application by Evans Road Community Church is to extend its existing church at 30 Evans Road, Papamoa. And the proposal includes a new 180-person capacity auditorium with ancillary rooms and additional on-site car parking, increasing from the existing number to 47 car parking spaces. The site is zoned suburban residential. Within that, it's my submission that places of worship that provide community support functions are anticipated. And the proposed building is compliant with the bulk and scale provisions of the zone, particularly as they affect adjoining neighbours. The activity status of the proposal is discretionary. The applicant's case is that the proposed development is appropriate and deserving of resource consent, firstly because the built form has been architecturally designed and is in keeping with its surrounding environment. There are no built form exceedances giving rise to any adverse effects. And although the building is larger than a residential dwelling, it has been designed to integrate with the surrounding suburban residential character. Secondly, the proposed church is appropriate for its location, it being consistent with the established church on the site and being of a location, scale and nature that is compatible with existing and anticipated residential amenity. In this case, actual and potential effects have been assessed by suitably qualified and experienced professionals whose recommendations have been taken into account in developing the proposal. And this has included an assessment of noise generation, traffic generation and car parking and landscape and visual amenity impacts. It has also included a flood assessment for the purposes of Plan Change 27. The proposal in my submission is consistent with the objectives and policies of the city plan, including the objectives and policies of proposed plan changes 26 and 27. And so based on the effects assessment and a comprehensive assessment of the objectives and policies, when considered against relevant matters under section 104, it's my submission that the proposal is deserving of resource consent. The applicant acknowledges that outlooks from private properties will change as a result of the proposal for those surrounding the church. It's the case for the applicant that although the proposal will introduce a larger built form into the neighbourhood, the proposal complements the surrounding neighbourhood in terms of the architectural design. In reality, at some point, whether under this proposal or otherwise, the green space at 30 Evans Road will be redeveloped. In this context, change is not unanticipated and the proposal may offer benefits that may not be present with an alternative future redevelopment scenario under more permissive urban development rules. In preparing and assessing the proposal against the relevant statutory and planning frameworks and considering the associated effects, the applicant has sought advice from a range of experienced consultants who are specialists in their fields. And the following witnesses give evidence today on behalf of the applicant: Ian Dixon for the applicant, Bruce Harrison, traffic engineer, Damien Ellerton, acoustic engineer, Blair Clinch, registered landscape architect, and Tracy Hayson, planner. I just touched briefly on plan changes 26 and 27. Plan change 26 in relation to housing choice is not directly relevant to places of worship as it addresses housing choice or intensification, but it is relevant in my submission to the extent that it looks to remove emphasis on the suburban residential zone being a low density zone, which is referred to by submitters. Hearings on Plan Change 26 have been postponed, but the plan change has not been withdrawn. Plan Change 27, flooding from intense rainfall, is relevant to the extent that it had legal effect from the date of notification, and this application was reassessed in light of Plan Change 27. The objectives and policies of the city plan, as available on the Tauranga City website in respect of the suburban residential zone, were amended by Plan Change 26, say Plan Change 26 no legal effect. I just note that the legal effect provisions of course relate to rules. Accordingly, the objectives and policies of both Plan Change 26 and Plan Change 27 are relevant to the assessment to be carried out under section 104. Turning to the key issues in this case, the opposition to the proposal is largely centred around potential impacts on residential character and amenity. This issue appears to present itself in three forms: whether the building or the built form is in keeping with the residential character and amenity of the surrounding environment, whether an expanded place of worship on the site is in keeping with the surrounding residential environment, specifically the intensity of the activity, and thirdly, concern about vehicles associated with use of the church parking in the streets. So from my perspective, those are the key issues in contention, subject of course to what we might hear from submitters during their presentations. Dealing with the issue of built form, the tenor of the submissions in opposition is that the proposed building is out of character with the surrounding residential environment due to its scale, and that's principally its length and height. There are no bulk and scale rule infringements, and accordingly no adverse effects which are different from those that could be received under a complying residential development, such as overshadowing. However, Mr. Clinch has acknowledged that the proposed building is of an increased bulk and scale to the residential dwellings that typify development in the area. To address this, the proposal includes measures to integrate it into the residential environment and provide positive streetscape, residential and reserve interfaces. These measures include facade materials of a residential aesthetic, contrasting facade colours, modulated built form, and the application of mitigation and amenity planting. On that basis, Mr. Clinch considers that adverse landscape effects are mitigated to a low degree and visual amenity effects to a moderate to low degree. Under a Plan Change 26 analysis, however, the built form is substantially more consistent with what can be expected as a result of the policy change away from low density of dwellings for most sites within the suburban residential zone. Reference in the policies to development contributing to the overall open nature of the surrounding environment is to be deleted, as is the reference to a low density of dwellings. The proposed building has been designed to complement the residential environment within which it sits. Substantial landscaping is proposed. Given that places of worship are anticipated in the suburban residential zone and that this proposal builds on an existing activity, there should be no question in my submission about its ability to integrate into the surrounding residential environment. Turning to places of worship. Places of worship are anticipated in the suburban residential zone and are evident within Papamoa. Under the suburban residential zone provisions, the expectation is that they will be compatible with existing and anticipated residential amenity in terms of location and scale, including the attraction of visitors to the site and hours of operation, and the nature of the activity's actual and potential adverse effects on the surrounding residential neighbourhood, character, amenity, and the transport network. A place of worship currently exists on 30 Evans Road and has done so successfully, suggesting that there is no locational issue with that site. The proposed expansion is for a 180-person auditorium, but this is not in addition to the existing seating capacity. In other words, a 280-seat auditorium is not proposed, as has been assumed by some submissions. Rather, the current capacity of 130 is to be increased to 180. The increase in scale is reasonable and easily within the capacity of the site. Furthermore, each of the aspects of potential concern to neighbours arising from the extension proposed, including particularly noise generation and traffic and car parking, have been assessed by independent experts and are considered to be acceptable. Nothing about the effects generated by the church have caused the experts particular concern. Turning to the question of car parking, cars will park in the streets for Sunday services. Mr. Harrison has assessed that on a Sunday there will be an expected peak parking demand of approximately 101. On those days there is expected to be an overflow parking demand of up to 54 spaces. Mr. Harrison has undertaken a survey and has identified a total of approximately 100 car parking spaces available, which is sufficient to accommodate the expected overflow parking demand of up to 54 spaces on a Sunday morning. As Mr. Clinch says, such effects are temporary in nature, and as Ms. Hayson says, this is unlikely to lead to an unacceptable adverse effect on neighbourhood amenity. Beyond concerns about residential character and amenity, the city plan looks to make sure that places of worship are compatible with existing and anticipated residential amenity in terms of actual and potential adverse effects on the transport network. No concerns have been identified in this regard by the applicant or the council's traffic engineers. I touched briefly on legal considerations, and firstly the existing environment, which of course is relevant under section 104(1)(a). The key principles in relation to that in my submission are that it is for the decision maker to determine the existing environment, which is essentially an evaluative factual assessment. That includes having regard to lawfully authorised activities, including the environment as it might be modified by the implementation of resource consents which have been granted at the time a particular application is considered, where it appears likely that those resource consents will be implemented. And then lastly, that when a territorial authority is deciding the plan for the future, there is nothing in the RMA to constrain a forward-looking thinking, and the likely to be implemented test in respect of resource consents was intended to be a real-world analysis. What falls within the environment is essentially an evaluative exercise for the Commissioner, but clearly in this case it includes the existing church. That's an activity which is already lawfully authorised and which forms part of the existing environment. This issue is not just relevant to assessing the degree of effect on the environment from the expanded proposal. It is also relevant in my submission when considering the additional controls and mitigation that would be brought about by this proposal. For example, the existing resource consent contains no hard restrictions on the numbers of people that may attend the church or the hours of operation. The application for resource consent noted that most church and community meetings occurring during the week would be finished by 10 p.m, that occasionally a funeral would occur during the week, and further that weddings would occasionally occur on Saturdays, usually, and that the auditorium space accommodates approximately 130 people. In contrast, the recommended conditions of consent for this proposal propose strict restrictions on the frequency and duration of activities and the number of people on site, and on the types of activities that can occur on site. The net increase in the number of people who can attend the Sunday church service is 50, increasing from 130 to 180. At all other times, numbers are restricted to 60 or less, which in my submission is arguably a tighter and stricter restriction than currently exists with the existing church. Just touching on the question of property values, that is an issue that has been raised by some submitters as a concern. The Commissioner will be well aware that the law is quite clear that effects on property values are not a relevant consideration in determining whether a resource consent should be granted. If there is any diminution in property values, then that is simply a measure of adverse effects on amenity values. Even then, the Environment Court has noted that evidence regarding effects on property values is generally speculative and therefore of less value to the decision-making process than evidence regarding the physical effects of a proposal on the environment, and that to consider impacts on property values would essentially double count effects on potentially affected properties, because where the effects that are perceived to affect value are assessed, such as amenity, a second evaluation as to how those effects might also impact on property values is therefore not required. And I won't read out, but I've just reproduced a quote there from a relevant Environment Court decision in that regard. It is my strong submission that the Commissioner should have no regard to any submission that the proposal will affect property values, rather the effects of the proposal have been directly assessed. And I see there's a footnote crept in there, it's 24, which should be deleted. In relation to the question of positive effects, the proposal has positive effects as a result of the community support function that it fulfills. As set out in Mr. Dixon's evidence, the church provides a place for a wide range of community support services to children's groups and the like. In its enlarged form, with a modern heating system and commercial kitchen installed, it will be better placed to undertake this community support function. These positive effects are relevant to the Commissioner's determination under section 104(1)(a), and through the reference to provision for a limited range of community support activities, including places of worship that provide community support functions for residents within residential zones. In this regard, Papamoa has grown exponentially since the church first received resource consent in 1998. And it certainly makes sense in my submission to extend the existing place of worship providing community support functions rather than increasing services by providing a new facility elsewhere. On the topic of conditions, Ms Hayson has proposed amended conditions as an attachment to her evidence. In conclusion, it's my submission that the Evans Road Community Church is a prime example of a place of worship providing a community support function. The range of community support activities provided at the church, which is canvassed in Mr Dixon's evidence, is wide and commendable and fulfills an important function. The church is already operating at 30 Evans Road, and its proposed extension to enable a larger auditorium is accompanied by substantial landscaping and substantially tighter controls on operating hours and number of attendees. In my submission, it's appropriate for its location, it being consistent with the established church and being of a location, scale and nature that is compatible with existing and anticipated residential amenity. And for those reasons, in my submission, it is deserving of resource consent. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have some questions. Turning to, I'll just go back to, I've got a couple that I'd noted beforehand, but looking at your paragraph 19 first.
Yes.
You say that the fact that the church already exists suggests there's no locational issues with the site. Is whether or not there's a locational issue directly linked to the scale of the development and use of the building though?
It's just that the relevant policy in the city plan does refer to location. So just bear with me, I will find that. Policy 14A.1.3.1b.
Okay, just bear with me if you may. I think they're going to be in the AEE, so I'll just pull that up.
It's also the Objectives and Policies Assessment is also an Appendix J to the officer's report.
Yeah, I have to admit I got a bit confused by Appendix J. I'll open that up too. But you can probably help me with that then on that basis. I'll pull that up. Yeah, sorry, which one were we on? Sorry.
So if we go to page 090.
Yeah.
And under general residential zone there, it's got objective 14A.1.3 and policy 14A.1.3.1.
Yeah.
So the relevant part, so it starts by providing a variety of residential activities. If you drop down to B,
yep.
It refers to a limited range of community support activities being smaller scale tertiary education premises, then schools, then health centres and places of worship that provide community support functions. And then there's some more words. If you go over to the page to 091, it talks about being compatible with existing and anticipated residential amenity in terms of one, location and scale, including the attraction of visitors to the site and hours of operation. So that statement specifically in relation to the question of location. And my submission is that given that it already exists successfully there, it's also located on a corner of a busier road with a quieter residential street. So I'm certainly not saying that scale is not relevant, but that submission really was in relation to the question of location.
Okay, yeah. So I have a question regarding the policy. So if we go down to B, so we're on page 90, we go down to B, where it says smaller scale, are the words smaller scale in your view related only to tertiary education premises, or is it smaller scale tertiary education premises, smaller scale schools, smaller scale health centres, etc.?
It is my interpretation that it is related to the tertiary education premises. And the reason I come to that view is that it's a semicolon that follows tertiary education premises rather than a series of commas. I think if it was a series of commas, then potentially that would apply to all of them. but in my submission it's relating to tertiary education premises.
Thank you. So then your paragraph 30, just bear with me, I've got to go back to your oh yeah, sorry, this actually doesn't relate to 30. It was more a case of no, I don't know why I said 30. Oh yeah, 30. So in terms of that, I had assumed from what I'd read that there was a strict limit of 130 people at the church services placed on the previous consent, but you're saying it was just referred to in the application material rather than there being any conditions at all on numbers at any time of the day, any day of the week.
That's right. So there was certainly no, as is proposed in this case, with the quite tight conditions around the frequency and duration of activities and the numbers associated with those and how many can be on site at what times. There was no conditions around that. And so I should say, if the Commissioner doesn't have the original application and existing consent, I can arrange for those to be emailed through.
Yeah, that would be really helpful actually, just to have that to hand so that I can refer directly to that. Thank you.
Sure.
And then just thinking about and the MPS UD,
Yes.
clearly we've got and that is, I suppose, in summary, is about development capacity and making it easier to deliver development. We have a site which is zoned for residential use, which will, as a result of and vacant land, which is zoned for residential use, I suppose, more importantly, which will no longer be available for residential use should this development go ahead. So does that therefore mean that MPSUD is of more significance to this than I've heard from everyone?
I don't believe so, to the extent that functioning residential areas still require those community support activities, such as the ones that are recognised in the plan, the places of worship, the health centres, the schools. If anything, my submission would be that it is consistent with the MPSUD to provide for an expanded facility on this site rather than look at taking further land out somewhere else to create a new facility. And beyond that, I'll just note the issue for Ms. Hayson in case she has anything that she wishes to add to that from a planning perspective.
Thank you. And my last question relates to the objectives and policies. So in terms of the objectives and policies, how it's a discretionary application. If I was dealing with a restricted discretionary application, my consideration of the effects of the development would clearly be confined by the matters of discretion. In this instance, we have a restricted a discretionary application, so effectively, everything's up for grabs. But is it? Should I be making my or undertaking my consideration of the effects in light of what the objectives and policies are saying? How much should there's a limited number of objectives and policies which address a limited number of issues. Do they restrict my consideration of the effects?
I think that goes to weight rather than relevance. So because it is, as you say, a fully discretionary activity, I don't think it's a case of saying, well, certain effects are definitely not relevant or out of the frame. However, clearly the objectives and the policies of the city plan are going to be informing that. So if there is an effect, I can't think of one off the top of my head. But if there's an effect that is sort of in the frame because it's a discretionary activity, but it's not an effect which the objectives and policies of the city plan are concerned about, then I think it goes to weight, and the weight that you would give that in terms of your decision making rather than relevance.
Yeah.
Certainly, I agree the objectives and policies are relatively focused in this case, and they do set the frame of the main issues for consideration in my submission.
Thank you. So there was I had a couple of other yeah, these might be some questions for Miss Haysom in terms of the objectives and policies, but I just wanted to scroll down through those because I thought I had another question for you regarding them. So if you just bear with me.
Sure.
No, it's not there. I think it was really, and I wanted to find the objective and policy. If you could just bear with me a moment. So could someone, I wanted to ask you about the parking objective and policy, but I can't actually put my finger on it immediately. Can someone shout out and tell me which one I should be looking at?
4B.1.3.
Was it 4B.1.3?
That could well be it. Sorry, I was too far down the line.
So the transport ones are the first ones in the Appendix J to the officer's report.
Yeah, that's right. And this is where I got confused by Appendix J, actually. I'm on page 87. And we have the what I'm getting confused about on 87 is the second, on page 87 is the second column. What's the policy and what's the objective? Because they're not individually labelled. So I think I'm right in saying that objective 4B.1.3 is that parking is provided that meets the demands of activities either on site or in the vicinity. And then I think something below it is going to be policy 4B.1.3.1, but I'm not sure where 4B.1.3.1 starts in that second column.
Yes, and I probably need to check the plan to look at that.
But I assume that first indented point is part of the policy. It says on-site parking that reflects the demand, which seems somewhat different to what the objective above says, which talks about on-site or within the vicinity. Have you got a clean copy that's easier to read of that?
Yes. So I'll read you the objective.
Yeah.
Parking is provided that meets the demand of activities either on-site or in the vicinity to ensure that the safe, sustainable and efficient functioning of the adjoining transport network is maintained and that parking areas provide appropriate stormwater disposal. And then the policy starts with ensuring that land use activities provide, and then there's an A, B, C and D. And the first one is a level of on-site vehicle parking that reflects anticipated demand. So that looks, the second column looks like it's abridged it slightly.
Yeah, okay. So, sorry, what was that on-site parking that? What was
a level of on-site vehicle parking that reflects anticipated demand. B and C I'll skip over. D is on-site parking and loading areas that are configured to provide for the practical and safe movement of vehicles on-site and off-site and avoid, remedy or mitigate adverse effects on the safe and efficient operation of the transport network, including the function of roads as identified in the road hierarchy.
So I think there is a question in there for you that I was thinking. It is really where we've got a policy which is being it seems a bit more specific, I think, in terms of saying that on-site parking should meet demand, but yet we have an objective that indicates that perhaps you meet it either on-site or in the vicinity, which seem two quite different propositions to me in the context of this application. I just wonder whether you could give me some advice as to how I should consider the relative, how do I balance what the objective is saying versus what the policy is saying?
Yes, well, certainly you're right. The objective anticipates both, and the policy is framed more narrowly than that. I think, the objective's at the top of the tree, so I certainly would not be submitting that that's narrowed through the policy. The other point, and I made this in my submissions, but if you look at the way parking is reflected in the residential policy, the emphasis is really on the transport network in this regard, more so than effects on residential character and amenity from car parking. And I think to that extent, the objective is consistent with that, because that's talking about parking either on site or in the vicinity to ensure safe, sustainable and efficient functioning of the adjoining transport network. So the point I was making in my submissions was that the relevant residential policy in respect of car parking was focused on the transport network, and I would say the same in respect of this objective policy.
Great, thank you. That was it for my questions of you.
Thank you. Well, the first witness I was going to call was Mr. Dixon for the applicant. Now he's appearing via Teams. Now I've advised the witnesses that you will have pre-read the evidence, so that they should really just speak to a summary or highlight key points when talking to you, and then they would go to questions.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So Mr.
Dixon.
Yeah, if you just turn your microphone
at the moment. I think your mic might be off. I've got Mr. Dixon on screen with myself and the room. Is it possible to adjust it so I just have Mr. Dixon on screen?
I will find out, sir.
Yeah, you're still on mute, Mr. Dixon. I'm not sure whether something needs to be turned off, but you may have been muted by the council rather than by yourself. I'm not sure.
Okay, here we go. How's it?
Oh, that's better. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll just leave things as they are on screen and carry on. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, just a summary that it was back in 1990 that the elders of the Evans Road, of St Andrews Mount Maunganui, they purchased farmland that was destined for development, and that became the corner of the Evans Road, Maysbury Close, and they sort of oversaw the Pathmore outreach. And then in 1996, the Te Hātai Coast School Hall was a place where we started our worship services. And then in 1997, a committee of the Evans Road Community Church met for the first time for the purpose of planning, constructing a building on the land that was recently purchased. And then in 1998, we received that resource consent, so we started our worship facility 2 years later with our new building. And the Reverend Ray Costa titled A New Church for the New Millennium. And they were designed in a way that when the time was right, the second phase of the worship centre could be extended along Maysbury Close, which is indicated on the original plans. Since then, we've had various ministers at ERCC. I became a minister at the church in November 2014, where we saw quite a lot of growth in that period. But I also want to mention to the committee that I was one of the original members of the Evans Road Church that started in the Tahate Coast School in 1996, just down the road from where the church is today. I was 30 years of age at that time. Over the last 25 years, I've seen Peppermile grow, as you all have. It's been steady, it's been a rapid rate. And it was during my tenure that we just, the congregations grew from about 50 to about 130 people. And we realised that we needed a resource consent to extend. And so to fulfil the original vision that the church leaders had about extending it along Maysbury Close, which is phase 2 of our church building. And so that made sense to us. And so the leadership decided to test the waters about raising funds for the new building to see if the congregation had a heart for that. We did a 5-week financial series as the time to build, it was titled. And over the last 3 years, we've raised $650,000, which gives an indication that the congregation are right behind this building. And also we've received from Presbytery full support, subject to raising half of it, which we have done. Now, the new build will give us more dedicated children's space for teens, larger foyer and worship centre, which can hold everyone, a better cafe style environment. We also incorporate in the design a modern heating system, commercial kitchen, which will enable us to be a better place to support the community gatherings. And not only that, but the new build will enable us to establish community-focused ministries to serve the community in numerous ways, that and an extension of the talents and abilities of those who choose to be part of the Evans Road Community Congregation. Now, in response to our meeting with the neighbours back in early 2020, we really did try to listen to their concerns and then incorporate some of the thoughts that were discussed at the meeting into the design. And we agreed that it did pretty much look like a barn, and so we wanted to take away that barn look. And so we allowed entrance canopies in both sides of Maysbury Close and also in the car park area. Adding brickwork and linear weatherboard to match the existing church building as well as match the design of the surrounding community. And it was our initial thought that we could allow 6 metre space from the boundary fence, just as people could drive from Maysbury Close into the church building that side. But we heard that the Maysbury Close residents, they didn't want traffic along that street. So we decided that we won't use that. We'll put trees there instead. We'll put a bike rack and we'll encourage the congregational members to travel into the entrance on Evans Road. And so we have allowed that to happen. Now, a lot of thought and money have been put into the landscaping to beautify the building and property, creating hopefully a landmark that people of Peppermile will be proud of. And the existing car park and the grass area will be tar sealed, and will just finish off that site beautifully. And just my last comment is that the new extension will enable the congregation to have a place that they can call their own, rather than sharing that space with several community groups, which means endless setting up and packing away chairs. And we've been doing that for the last 20 years as we allowed the original building to be used by the community. But it meant that as a congregation, we had to share it, a bit like hiring a hall, I guess. And so we were looking in anticipation where we'd actually set up chairs and remain them set up for church on a Sunday or meetings that we may have solely for ourselves during the week. And so, yeah. So that's my just summary of my evidence that I have presented.
Thank you. It would be good to talk about some of the activities that take place, and in terms of the number of people that are being suggested for limits on those activities versus what you typically see at the moment.
Yes.
And also, I think I've read somewhere there was a comment made, and I don't remember which piece of evidence it was now, was that events such as funerals would be limited only to church members. I just sort of first off, I suppose my first question is what does that mean? If someone came to you who wasn't someone who regularly attended your church and said, we would like to organise a funeral here, would you say no? I suppose, or is everyone effectively a member of your church community if they wish? So, in terms of that question, if you could perhaps answer that first.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, now, me being a minister for 17 years, we do from occasion get people who walking off the street asking if somebody could have a funeral that's not a member of our congregation, and they usually would like to provide their own minister for one reason or another. Yeah, we have strongly suggested that no, we would like to use our own ministers in that regard, and not a celebrant, and we're really strong in that. And because of our stance on that, we often don't get a lot of inquiries who are outside the church. So it's mainly before the members of the Evans Road Community Church membership, and I'm sure that's enough. There's a lot of celebrants in the community that will pick up the funerals, and they do a fantastic job. They have their own facilities.
Is that similar for weddings?
Now, weddings, no, that's a little bit different. We do get the occasional person. I've only taken 1-2 weddings since I've been there at Evans Road. They've been on the small side. There's a small gathering, and so yeah, maybe we could I don't know, have a discussion with those young people who would like to get married. I just don't see a lot of that of weddings happening in the church. Not in this day and age that we're in. They prefer to go out the beaches. They may ask for a secondary site, which we could perhaps offer. I don't know, but it's not a real demand I see in the future.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the numbers that are apart from the church service, where clearly there is a limit that's been put on the church services, which is significantly greater than you could currently accommodate, or 1.5 times ish greater than you could currently accommodate. In terms of those other numbers for those other events throughout the week, are those numbers that are going in the conditions similar to the number of people you currently expect to partake in those activities?
Yes.
Or are they a bit higher? Are you allowing some growth?
Yep. At the moment, we do have our facilities well used with the Carry Centre. The Carry Elderly Care Group, they have about 2 vans where they pick up their residents, and and so that will minimise traffic flow, which is good. And they predominantly have it 3 days a week. They suggested a 4th day. And this will enable us to use our building with our ladies Bible study group, because they are not got their own 2 vans which they pick up, drop off people. We may be able to use our building perhaps on a Thursday for our ladies Bible study, which will enable them to have that day for themselves. Yeah. So that's what I can see could happen.
So you can see more taking place in the future than currently. So there's a number of events, as it were, because you can have multiple things happening at once. Well,
if you've got the building and the space, that's just one example. I know that the manager of the Carry Centre did ask, look, could we use our building for 1 more day? And at that time, we were using our facilities ourselves on the Thursday, and that wasn't possible. Yeah. One way we could actually raise, it will help us to hire it out to this wonderful group who are doing a fantastic service in the community, and also to allow 30 ladies to turn up for a Bible study and a bit of fellowship on the Thursday at the same time. And like I said, they only have 2 vehicles on the site. Yeah, of course. They have about 25 folk, elderly folk, who they care for. Yeah.
No, that I understand that. No, that was it for me really, in terms of understanding a little bit more about how things work and the flexibility that may come with the extension. So no, thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. We'll go back to in person now to Blair Clinch, landscape architect, and following that we'll go back to Damien Ellerton on Teams.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I'll just provide a short summary of my evidence.
Yeah, could you just wait 1 second, because I thought we were going in a different order, so I don't have you open yet, so just bear with me.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, thank you.
Thank you. It is my view that the principal elements of the proposal that will give rise to landscape and visual effects are bulk and scale of built form design and materiality, and the asphalt car park extension. It is my opinion that the church building extension proposal will introduce a change to the receiving landscape and visual environment. Change in itself is not a direct adverse effect, and the proposal is placed within an area where built form is prevalent and anticipated within this already developed residential context. The proposed building is of an increased bulk and scale to the residential dwellings that typify development in the area. It is my view that the policy provisions for places of worship within the suburban residential zone indicates an anticipation for variation and diversity in built form, bulk and scale to align with the increased scale of expected use of these community facilities. The proposal includes measures to integrate this increased bulk and scale of built form into the receiving residential environment and provide positive streetscape, residential and reserve interfaces through the application of facade materials of a residential aesthetic, contrasting facade colours, modulated built form, and the application of mitigation and amenity planting that is coherent with the surrounding residential landscape and visual context. Landscape and visual effects in relation to increased traffic volumes and overflow parking would be temporary in nature and vary in their degree of temporary effect relative to the scale of the event on the application site and associated number of vehicles. During the time of peak parking demand, it is my view that temporary visual effects for those most sensitive to visual change would be of a moderate degree. The grade of proposed mitigation planting has been increased from PB95 or 45 litres to 150 litre grades in response to the peer review recommendations and the officer's report. This provides for a greater immediate mitigation impact, resulting in the degree of visual effects being at the upper end of the moderate to low degree of effects scale at time of implementation. I've concluded that as a result of these features of the proposal, adverse landscape effects are mitigated to a low degree and visual amenity effects to a moderate to low degree, where I consider the proposed church building extension to appropriately integrate into the receiving and anticipated suburban residential character.
Thank you. The first question for me comes to that last paragraph. Looking at paragraph 15 of your evidence, which is in your summary. In terms of evidence that I've had before, people have often expressed the opinion in terms of landscape and visual assessment that a low effect is equivalent of minor in RMA terms. Is that, do you agree with that?
Within the assessment methodology that was used within this assessment, which was the Balthama School Landscape and Visual Effects Assessment Methodology, we as an organisation have come to the conclusion that that the low to moderate portion of the scale is where minor sits. And it's somewhere within that. I do note in my evidence that there are the updated landscape and visual effects assessment guidelines provided by the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects, which is the draft has been adopted. It's important to note that this has been a collaborative approach with a number of experienced practitioners, including Balthama School, who I work with, and other large organisations to provide an update to that scale. My understanding of that is the minor effects threshold sits differently within that, but certainly based on my assessment, minor sits within the low to moderate effects portion of the scale rather than low.
So you think in the new NZILA guidance that minor may sit lower than low to moderate?
Yes, potentially. It's actually an ongoing one of the final refinements for that. I'm not fully involved in that process, but that is one of the final pieces of work to do, and that is the area where a lot of, and one of the main reasons why that work has been done to try and bring a consistency of approach and consistency of where that minor threshold sits within the scale, for the benefit of the courts and others to understand clearly.
So in terms of my consideration of that issue, your assessment has been carried out in accordance with the Balthama methodology.
Yes.
So would it therefore be appropriate for me to accept minor being where that methodology is to be consistent? I surely have to accept that minor is somewhere in low to moderate, which is what that methodology says.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That is what I suggest.
And I have to admit, I know the methodology was provided at some point somewhere. I don't think I didn't look specifically at it and read it in detail. So that's explicit within that methodology that minor is in the low to moderate range, is it?
Yes, I believe there is a statement within that. I'll have to confirm that.
Yeah, it'd be good if you could, please. If you could at some point, and that might just come as part of the closing or the reply. If you could confirm exactly where that is. So I think that just helps inform my effects assessment. Now this is where I'm going to get lost through the policies again, and I'm not sure where I found the easy to read version of the policies, because as I said, the appendix to the section 42 up a little bit. Just bear with me a second. I thought it was in something Ms. Hasten had produced, so perhaps it was her evidence. If you can just bear with me whilst I get my papers sorted, as it were. Oh, yeah, here we go. Yeah, just do you have a copy of Ms. Hasten's evidence at all?
Yes.
On page 17, we have the objectives and policies which talk about the bulk and scale of buildings in the suburban residential zone. I think one of the things that I always slightly struggle with many landscape and visual assessments is that, and I appreciate, and you will know this from the question I asked Ms. Ham earlier, that this is a discretionary application, and all issues are there to be considered. But in this instance, in terms of my consideration of effects and also my consideration of the objectives and policies, the objectives and policies seem reasonably confined in terms of the issues they're asking, they're discussing. Because it talks about, in objective 14B.1.1, it's talking about buildings that are bulk and scale that's compatible with the anticipated suburban residential character and amenity. And then the policy below it, talks about building height and overshadowing. And I'm not sure that I'm seeing because of the LVA methodology, seen a specific focus on these issues. If you sort of get where I'm coming from, I guess it would be good if you could, in terms of buildings that are of bulk and scale compatible with the existing and anticipated suburban residential character and amenity, what do you think that means from your perspective?
That was one of the main considerations in the assessment was on defining what that meant from an assessment perspective. With regard to the suburban residential zone as a whole and the provisions for places of worship and other community type facilities, it's my view that there is an anticipation through that of variation in built form and scale to accommodate these, and that it is in fact part of the residential character. That residential character isn't just comprised of residential properties, but also the supporting facilities within those areas that aren't necessarily of a residential use. So that was part of it from an activity perspective and the kind of associated bulk and scale of the buildings that reflect those activities. On top of that, the more clear ones around building height and overshadowing, you would have heard in Ms. Ham's evidence and introduction that it's within all of those provisions. There's no exceedance of those. However, I do acknowledge in my evidence that that alone doesn't necessarily account for and eliminate adverse effects that the overall bulk and scale and the quality and the articulation of built form and the materiality of built form that's of a larger scale, typical residential dwellings, is where it becomes important. So that's where I think effects are addressed more comprehensively, are in those finer scale designs where we're inside the site coverage, height, bulk and scale provisions of the plan, but at a finer, more refined scale, we've addressed effects of the larger scale built form through appropriate building modulation, where you see the eaves jut out through the central portion of the building, which reduces the overall linear effect of that proposal, the material composition, which breaks up the overall bulk and scale of those views from all sides, as well as those materials being of a residential nature, being painted brick and weatherboard type materiality, and then combined with some of the other mitigating factors not tied to the building, such as the extensive landscape mitigation planting and existing street trees and other mitigating factors that exist, as well as the open space to the south of the site, being the Wairakei stream corridor, which provides which supports the overall larger bulk and scale there by providing an increased open space character and distance separation to some residential dwellings to the south.
Thank you. That's sort of helpful to go through it that way, because I think from my perspective, it sort of, I think the trouble is with an LVA, it's so easy to get lost in the words and the descriptions that it's actually nice to have you just sort of talk and tie it back to the objective and policy there in that summary. So thank you. No, I think that's probably it. I think the one takeaway is if you could find that paragraph and pass that through, perhaps, as I said in the reply, that would be really good to have that to link back to your methodology. Thank you, and I apologise for not reading the complete methodology itself beforehand, but no, thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to Damien Ellison now, who's on Teams.
Okay, yes.
Acoustic.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Everton. I have your evidence in front of me, and as you would have heard, I have read the evidence, but if perhaps you could give me a bit of a summary, and then I have some questions for you.
Thank you, sir. I think I'll just start my executive summary and quickly traverse that, and then maybe just highlight a couple of other paragraphs within my evidence, sir.
Thank you.
So executive summary, paragraph 11, the operation of the church and community facility can comply with the Tauranga city plan noise limits. I'm not aware of any noise complaints regarding the existing site activity. The proposed extension has been designed to ensure noise is appropriately controlled off of site. A number of neighbours have raised noise as an issue of concern, and I've addressed these as pretty much as a group, sir. There are no noise issues raised that have not been previously addressed. I have suggested a couple of noise conditions should consent be granted to address concerns raised. Noise from the construction can comply with the daytime noise limits recommended in New Zealand Standard 6803. And I agree with the conclusion reached in the Council Officer's Section 42A report. Just skipping ahead, sir, to paragraph 22. In a general sense, with regard to a perceived change in amenity, and this was raised by the submitter, sir, in response to the general comments that a loss of amenity may occur, it is my opinion that compliance with the Tauranga City Plan noise limits will ensure noise is controlled to an appropriate level, and therefore amenity will be maintained. And just skipping ahead to my last short sentence in paragraph 25, sir, where I just make the point that there will be periods of zero site use. Obviously, we focus on when the site is being used, but there will be extended periods of time when there is literally zero people on site and zero site use. As part of our process, sir, we often look at, if you like, the biggest potential source of noise or worst case scenario, and if that can comply, then everything else should fall into place or certainly comply by a greater degree. So my paragraph 26, sir, I've considered the potential increase in congregation size, sorry. My section 92 response to council clearly addresses potential numbers on site and how noise from places of worship can be adequately controlled, ensuring doors are closed and mechanical ventilation is provided so that doors aren't propped open. In my paragraph 28, obviously I've again stated there the building design anticipates amplified music, which is the single biggest source of noise. Paragraph 31 regarding mechanical services. This potential source of noise was mentioned in a large number of submissions, and I suspect the submitters were not aware of the proposed condition of consent regarding mechanical services equipment control. And again, I re-emphasise that in my paragraph 32, where it states, in the section 92 information provided to council, and it is repeated below, is a proposed condition of consent that ensures control of mechanical services noise is provided before that equipment is used, often through the building consent process, sir. Skipping ahead to paragraph 35, I've read the section 42A report and agree with the conclusion regarding the actual environmental effects. And in my paragraph 36, the only area of disagreement I have is the proposed imposition, should consent be granted, of a construction noise and vibration conditions of consent. And I discuss it further in my paragraph 40, where again I disagree with those conditions of consent, and for the following reasons in 41 to 43. I'm happy to leave it there, sir, if you've got any questions.
Yeah, could we just pop back up to 37 and the condition regarding operational noise?
Yes, sir.
So I don't quite understand the condition, I have to say. So that's qualified and experienced acoustic consultant will go into the building after it's complete. Is that what's been suggested, and assess whether they believe that activities within it will comply?
Yeah, the intent, sir, is actually that prior to that, so that before the building's built, that a suitably qualified and experienced person informs the district, the Tauranga City Council, that the building is, if you like, fit for purpose.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a case of going in. So they're having input into the detailed design.
Yes.
And there may be finishes or insulation or whatever that they're suggesting.
Absolutely.
Which will assist with the building to achieve the noise standards.
Yes.
And we're not suggesting any form of review condition, because of course, if the building does, we're not granting consent for any breaches of the standards, and therefore if the building doesn't comply or once it's in use, the council can immediately take action under the existing rules in place.
That's right, sir. Yeah, so they can require monitoring as they see fit in response to in the unlikely event of any adverse response. And I think I've said elsewhere in my evidence here that we've already done some preliminary design, which we do for many clients in terms of them working out, the building form and if you like, basic pricing. So what do we need to do to comply? Can we have a stock building, or do we need to have some enhancements? And certainly we've worked with them on what sort of enhancements they'd need to ensure noise is controlled from inside to outside.
So I'm not sure that I'm unnecessarily, as you would have guessed from my question, that I didn't fully understand that condition. I'm wondering whether or not it would be worthwhile considering whether that condition needs some minor tweaks to sort of make it perhaps
crystal clear,
a bit more about the process.
Yes, sir.
Because I think the way I read, I think my confusion is that that noise from the proposed, when we move on to the second page where it splits across the page, the noise from the proposed extension will be controlled to ensure compliance with the district plan rules. That's two things, I suppose. It's design, isn't it, of the building and construction and use. So perhaps it needs making a bit more clear about the process that we're expecting this person to go through,
and where it sits in the timeline.
Yeah, and I think what is it they're doing and when.
Yeah, we can start with possibly start with changing the heading from operational noise to building design.
Yes,
which implies it's before you start operating out. Totally take that point, and I'm sure you can come up with some more appropriate or clear wording of the intent of that.
Okay, so then going back to the questions I noted, in terms of your paragraph 22, where you talk about the potential 105 hours of noise, so the noise limit is 50 dB LAEQ.
Yes.
I think I know what you're saying, but I suppose my question is really, is it likely that a hobbyist is going to be doing that? But what you're saying is, if they're doing that, they're not causing any issue anyway, because they're within the noise limits and therefore shouldn't be causing disturbance.
Yeah, so at 7 o'clock in the morning, the noise limit goes from 40 to 50, stays there for 15 hours till 10 p.m.
Yeah,
it drops down, and anything within that sort of envelope of total noise there is acceptable under the district plan. And what we're saying is there will be time. The application is always going to comply, but we'll never use up that whole, if you like, entirety of noise budget.
I mean, I suppose at the end of the day, though, that you're saying that the only thing that gets close to the 50 is going to be the church service. Yet actually, there is no limitation upon the church using its complete hours of operation, which do go to 10 p.m. I think on each evening, in terms of the conditions, with activities that equally go up to 50. So I'm not sure that the comparison is valid, is it?
Well, no, it's in effect a noise, if you like, a noise budget for that site and in fact any other site. And I think the point we're making here is that there's a number of activities that happen, but none of them will breach the 50.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
moreover, there's literally it's not a technical term, a bunch of time when there's nobody on site.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I hear what you say. So you've got that. Sorry, that's the same thing. So in terms of the condition regarding mechanical service and services and the noise produced by them, that will look at, or will that look at, location and the noise generated by them?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Yeah.
And again, we do this commonly.
Yeah.
So the day it's turned on, we know the outcome rather than having to go back to a site.
Yeah. No. Fine. Okay. I suppose in terms of your paragraph 41, this whole issue regarding vibration, and I think is that conditions 22, 24 you're talking about, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
The whole issue of vibration, you said that the Taronga City Plan doesn't have any limits and standards that relate to vibration, and therefore you don't think it's appropriate to include vibration conditions. But you would have heard me ask the question earlier, which I think is probably an analogy to this of Ms. Han about the how far are we restricted in terms of the consideration of effects by those effects effectively that objectives and policies discuss. And she said, you know, it doesn't limit us as such. It helps focus and perhaps we give greater weight to those issues. But as this is a discretionary application, as I see it, there's no reason that we couldn't put conditions regarding vibration limits on.
I think from my perspective, sir, the fact that the plan is effectively silent on vibration indicates to me that actually it's if it's not a live issue, so to speak, or something of enough concern when they were drafting the plan that it needed to be included. Certainly my evidence there is that the first time vibration has been mentioned was when the proposed conditions in the 42A report were issued recently, a couple of weeks ago. So there's been no indication that was an issue either raised by submitters or by council up until that point, sir. I must add, I don't anticipate it's going to be an issue, but
No. Great, thank you. I think that was it from me. So, it's probably my most important question I nearly forgot. Is the issue of noise outside the building. And I appreciate that from memory, we get on to potentially 10 p.m. And there could be, and we all know that's from my lay perspective, and you probably know whether this is true, or you will know whether this is true from a technical perspective, but we always feel that sound travels further at night, but you're sort of more aware of it, I guess, when the ambient noise drops.
Yes.
And I'm sure for having read the submissions, this whole issue regarding noise in the car park and people leaving the building and all of those sort of things are a significant issue for people. And we've got a couple of dwellings that are side onto the car park, not so they're not shielded by the proposed extension from the parking area, and not necessarily shielded by distance either. Can you offer me some sort of advice on that issue, really, because that's one that I feel that I need to get more of a handle on.
Yes, sir. Yeah, well, one of the common techniques is obviously the operation of the facility, or in this case, the church and the community centre, will for those evening activities that finish a bit later, they'll ask the people using the facility to be mindful of the neighbours, and often you'll see signage inside places that saying, hey, please, please be mindful of our neighbours. I think the other thing in this particular case is, and I deal with a range of different activities, including fast food and petrol stations, and the reason for people to congregate outside at 10 o'clock or later at night varies from site to site. And in this case, I don't think that people are going to congregate in the car park and Yahoo or get up to any sort of antisocial behaviours there. I can't say that for all of the sites I look at, but in this particular case, I think the type of activity that it is somewhat more sedate and more controlled and more akin to a residential environment than some of the other activities I get involved in.
I mean, I guess it's that whole issue though, isn't it, where and we all do it. You finish your activity and then you can stand outside chatting for 5 minutes as you're meant to be getting in your car. So that really comes down to that signage that you suggest, really.
Yeah,
there's not a lot more you can do about that, is there?
It's really the management of the facility, sir.
Yeah. Okay. That is it now. Thank you.
No problems. If you've got any more questions, I'll be available later in the day, or if there's any follow-up questions.
That's really good. I mean, there may be questions that occur to me once I've been on site, and you would have heard that I haven't been, so I can pass those through. Hopefully there won't be any questions after I've been on site, but if necessary, I'll pass those through. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you. I'm just conscious of time.
Yes, just before we say goodbye to Mr. Ellerton, I just wanted to draw your attention, sir, to the fact that Mr. Ellerton's proposed conditions, around the mechanical ventilation and the operational noise, they were reworked into conditions in the Section 42A report, and Mr. Ellerton's evidence confirmed that those reworked conditions addressed his points. I just thought I'd draw that to your attention in case the 42A conditions on that raised any questions for you.
Okay, should I perhaps pull those up?
Yes, so it was conditions 18 and 19.
Okay, I'm just going to make sure I open up the appendix to that, so just bear with me.
It's Appendix E.
Yeah, I'm trying not to have too many things open at any one time, because you get to mid-afternoon and find out you've got 57 documents open and your computer's running slow. So 18, 19, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah. So this effectively does this replace the one that we were discussing, I was asking questions about a moment ago?
Yes, because the ones in Mr. Ellerton's evidence were what he proposed through response to Section 92, and he does go on to say that the condition 19 addresses those points.
Okay, I did have a question about this one because I'm confused by meeting condition 2A in 19B. So if I go up to condition 2A.
Sorry, Mr. Knott, I think that's actually a typo from me. I think that's supposed to be 19A, so it's just referring to the condition above.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah, so that should be, just going to make a note of that. So I think the question for this, in a way, for me, is still about timing of these things and how specific it is. So I just wanted to make a note of that. I think in terms of this whole thing about the acoustic assessment report and when it's done and how it's influencing the design of the building, I don't think it's a bit more clear to me from this, but I don't think I'm still necessarily seeing that. So I think some of the issues I was raising with Mr. Ellerton still sort of stand a little bit. I think I still feel that this probably needs tweaking a little bit to talk about a little bit about the process, about what's being done when and why. So perhaps I think that is good, but also in terms of 19B, sorry, the other question I had about that is I'm confused by the fact it says that ensures that internal noise levels of the church from all uses. So that's saying, oh, sorry, now I understand. It goes to 19A. So that's controlling internal noise levels to ensure that external noise levels are okay, isn't it? Now that it's got 19A, that makes more sense.
So if I can just jump in, often the timing is phrased around prior to the issue of building consent. The consent, shall, and that means you can't get too far down the track. Yeah,
okay. And then the fact that it's talking about internal acoustic mitigation. Yeah, okay. I think I'm probably happier now. I just wonder whether or not it probably needs a timing on there, I think, to show when it's happening, not when it's built, because that might be too late.
So at the moment, D says the certification shall be provided for certification by council's team leader.
Oh, okay, got that there. Sorry. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I
think it's tied up now then.
I think we could. It's two certifications. It's probably the report provided for certification prior to issue of building consent.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. So that's the first paragraph, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's getting there. Sorry, I sort of missed the overlap between those two. No. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Fine. No, thank you. I just feel this is me, and I don't think it's necessarily absolutely needed, but I just wonder whether it needs to make it clear that this acoustic assessment is more than an acoustic assessment. It's actually that qualified and experienced acoustic consultant inputting into the design of the building and then confirming it. Do you see what I mean? It's I just wonder whether it would be better to more explicitly show that this person is inputting and influencing the design. And I appreciate that when you read it together, that's sort of inherent is what is said. But I think I would feel more content or just generally happier if that was made a bit more clear.
Okay, thank you. We can certainly have a think about that.
I don't think it's a major. I just think it's just a clarity issue from my perspective. That Ms. Han, was that the only issue you wanted to raise following?
Yes, that was it for me.
Thank you. Okay, so just checking at where we're meant to be. We're now heading into morning tea, and we are running a little bit late. But I mean, from my perspective, I'd rather we covered the issues rather than try to stick with the timetable. But I'm still keen that we do take morning tea. I think we probably all need to stand up and stretch our legs and get some fresh air. So if we and again, I think I'm conscious of people having to rush out and try and get drinks and things. So I think we should take 20 minutes still. So should we come back at 10:55? So we adjourn till 10:55, and then hear your other two. I think we've got two witnesses
Yes.
still, haven't we? Yeah.
Traffic and planning.
Yeah. Thank you. If we could, so we'll adjourn till 10:55. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is some tea and coffee just straight out the doors to the back here, and the facilities are just further around the corner if you keep going around. If we could just, watch our social distancing and hand sanitizing, or I'll bring some extra cups shortly as well. Test, test.
Pretty good. Yeah, well, yeah, so I'm kind of doing in the signal scans world now last week. So this is we drag back here because I did the reviews. Your TA comments to the planners a year ago or whatever. Maybe we set up as a hearing room. Do you mind doing this? I did it. Well, yeah, all the news. See, is that big you say? Yeah. Yeah. He likes to talk. It's my observation. He seems knowledgeable. Yeah, no, yeah, delegates and stuff. So well, I think he's the temporary team leader, basically help well. Yes, he must have really wanted to be involved in the consenting side of it. So I think Mike will have he's coming. Area, which is all good. I mean, I quite enjoy this. You know, the consenting side, just reviewing, yeah, it's something that often it's a good experience. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I'm thinking of the one on the corner of German and Renata. Yeah. You did that. Yeah, that's right. It might not have been, that was the one I linked it to.
Test, 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 test. Test. Test, test. Test.
Oh, test.
So here's one interesting, two should be three. Yeah, I
found that
we still get because I think
table.
But they might have probably obliged to stick them because these are probably around the 8 months. Yeah.
test, test, test. See if this is any better. Test, test, test. Test.
So I sort of take that I know. Story of my life. No. Well, he won the guy now. He was, you know, but he never really. No. He was expertise, you know, like it's about the guy who loves signals and ideas and it was the opposite. And it was just kind of quite. I mean, it's a couple of jobs. So he was, so he's just basically doing projects and stuff. You know, he got nice. But then he realized, you know, he didn't realize that. So which I think is great. He's getting good job. He's got a job. He was there, he was never, he didn't work, I think. He just kind of got and he's got a lot of these energy type. Completely like just getting the job done. I've been out of the field for a while. So he's a counselor, takes the job basically. Quite enjoying
And there's some more here, Coral.
She's one of the video. Yeah.
can't see.
What are you doing? That's the same guy, even though I can't remember that.
Yeah, this was approaching. Yes, I will come back to it.
I think we're at 10:55 now, so time to come back is. It's very hard for me to check everyone's there, but just look like everyone is there who should be there.
So Mr. Harrison is ready to go. Shall I just pass over to him?
Yeah, no one missing from the room that should be back. It's hard for me to see.
Looks about right.
Yeah, good. Okay, yeah, if Mr. Harrison could if you could just go through a bit of a summary, Mr. Harrison, and then any other points that you'd like to bring to my attention. So thank you.
Right, yes, good morning. I thought I'd perhaps just pick out the important paragraphs and just go through those. So if we have a look at paragraph 15, which is the traffic generation and effects, I've updated the traffic generation table that was given in the transportation assessment report. That's table 1. Looking at paragraph 16, the table gives an expected Sunday traffic generation of 198 vehicles a day, with a morning peak of 99 vehicles per hour. Sorry, we're getting a bit of feedback through. I'm expecting traffic generation to be approximately 60% to the north, 40% to the south. Could vary a little bit, but that gives an increase in traffic on Evans Road of approximately 2.3%, which I've assessed as negligible, and any effects on the road network negligible. Paragraph 17, weekday traffic generation, 66 vehicles a day, which is an increase of approximately 0.8%. Assess that as minimal, with any effects unlikely to be noticeable. Next, paragraph 18, the car parking demand. If we turn over the page to table 2, I've updated that table as well. Shows an expected peak parking demand of approximately 101 spaces on Sunday and up to 34 spaces on a weekday. Paragraph 20, 47 on-site car parking spaces are proposed, which is sufficient to accommodate the expected weekday parking demand. However, there's going to be expected to be an overflow parking demand of up to 54 spaces on a Sunday morning. Looking down at paragraph 21 in table 3, I've updated that table as well. And then going over to paragraph 22, the survey has identified a total of approximately 100 car parking spaces within a 200-metre walking distance of the site, which is sufficient to accommodate the expected overflow parking demand of up to 54 spaces on Sunday. Moving down to access, I'll just note that that complies with the requirements of the city plan. Moving over to bicycle parking, although there is some bicycle parking shown on the plans, the actual number isn't specified, so I'm recommending that a bike will stand for a minimum of 4 bicycles to be provided. Paragraph 31, pedestrian access. The plan shows a footpath on the southern side of the existing building, but that footpath doesn't actually connect to the public footpath on Evans Road. So I'm recommending that that footpath be extended. That will provide a pedestrian connection onto the adjacent footpaths and will avoid pedestrians having to use the vehicle entranceway with potential conflict. So that's pretty much it, really. Consent conditions over on paragraph 37. So I've just summarised there, recommending bicycle ramp for 4 bicycles and the pedestrian connection to the footpath on Evans Road. So yeah, happy to take questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have some questions. Just let me just run through. I've marked up some things on your evidence. Just find the first one. So looking at the paragraph 16, and you discussed the increased daily traffic on Evans Road of being 2.3%. But in terms of those peak hour traffic flow of 99 vehicles per hour generated, so I presume because of the length of the services on a Sunday, we're going to have 99 vehicles going in before the service, and then within the next hour, 99 leaving the area. Is that correct?
Yes, that's effectively.
So and I appreciate that over the day, the increase in traffic on Evans Road is insignificant. But do you think that in terms of effects, and it's not just looking at sort of road capacity, I'm also thinking in terms of I suppose the additional traffic on adjacent residential roads where people are parking. Do you think that 99 vehicles per hour going in the morning, then heading out an hour within at the end of the next hour, as it were, is an issue from a traffic perspective?
No, I don't believe it's an issue. I mean, 99 vehicles an hour, I mean, that may be noticeable, in fact, probably will be noticeable to residents, but I don't think it would be to the extent that it would be detrimental.
In terms of a percentage increase in those hours, would you have a figure as to what that means? Because I mean, as I said, over the day it's clearly only 2.3%, but within those hours, do you know what that increase would be?
Not off the top of my head. I could possibly. Around 19%.
About 19%. So there's 19% increase in each of those 2 hours when that will occur.
Yes, yes, that's right.
So just excuse me making my notes. In terms of paragraph 18, you talk about the parking requirements in the district plan have been deleted. I was slightly confused when I read that, because I think in the AEE, the AEE makes reference to rules that require parking at a specific rate, or did I misunderstand that? I wonder what's the sort of the history to the. Do you know the history to the removal of the parking rules?
I I think when we did the original, I'll just check actually, I think when we did the original TA report, those parking requirements were still in there.
Yeah.
Yes, they were. So that they've been deleted in between preparing the TA report and preparing my evidence. I think it was late last year, was it?
Because of the NPS.
Yes.
It was a result of the NPS, was it?
Yeah, yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah, fine. But in effect, as I understand it, there is still parking requirements in the plan in so much as those policies that I referred to earlier make reference to having to provide sufficient parking in relation to demand, don't they?
That's correct.
So they've sort of gone, but they're still there?
Yes, that's correct. Yes. Yeah. So effectively, we're assessing it based on the actual expected parking demand rather than the rates that are in the city plan.
Yeah.
That were in the city plan.
And in terms of your calculation of that, I understand. So the 0.55 vehicles per hour per. Oh no, so that's so the parking demand was that a ratio of 0.56? Sorry, the parking rate of 0.56 spaces per person. Am I correct in thinking that I read that was that rate of 0.56 was taken from a survey carried out on a Sunday morning?
Yes, that's correct. What we did was we have published traffic generation data that we look at in the first instance.
Yes.
And we looked at that, and that gave a parking demand rate of about 0.5 spaces per person. That does vary a little bit from site to site. So to try and get a little bit of just to calibrate that effectively, we did a count of the cars parked on a Sunday morning and the number of people in the service, and that came out at 0.56. So it came out pretty close to the published data for churches.
So that published figure, is that published figure for church services or for church buildings?
Got me on that one. I guess it would. Yeah, I mean, I'll go to my next question, I suppose, really, is my next question is if I think about the way I behave and like everyone, I clearly think I'm normal, but and typical. If I go to activities on a weekend, I may be going with my wife, for instance, so therefore the parking rate of 0.56 average makes sense. Or you know, you might get a family going in a car. I can see to a church service, so there's 4 people, which makes up for the, you know, 2 people who turn up on their own in their own vehicles or whatever. But in terms of those weekday activities, for instance, evening events, I wonder whether some of those events might be more of the, you know, typically if I go out on a weekday evening, I'm often going on my own, and so there's, you know, my parking requirement is one space per person. Do you think on the basis, thinking about typically the way people behave, it was appropriate to use the same parking rate for the weekday activities as it was for the Sunday service? Yes, I did think about that when we did it. I mean, the vehicle occupancy does vary depending on what the activities are, and quite a few of the daytime activities, like there's a group for people from retirement homes, I think, which comes in, and they're using vans for transport to and from the site. There's another activity where it's like a children's music group.
Yeah.
Where again, that sort of thing, you quite often get one parent taking their child plus another child. So I think there's a variety of different things that happen. There are some people that would be 1 per car, and there'll be others where it'd be higher than that. I think that's still a reasonable sort of rate. As a rule of thumb, we normally use somewhere between 2.2 and 2.5 as a vehicle occupancy. So that rate is consistent with that.
I mean, again, I think those examples you gave there are more the sort of daytime activities, and perhaps is the potential evening activities that sort of concern me most as to whether or not that rate is appropriate. But you're happy with that it's okay even for the evening activities?
Yes, yeah, I'm confident that it's within the right sort of right ballpark. Yes.
Yeah. So in paragraph 33, you talk about the bus service. I mean, you then talk about it's been a low frequency of bus service. So I presume that doesn't provide an opportunity for anyone to use it for. Is it sufficiently infrequent that it's unlikely anyone would use it for any of the activities at the church, do you think?
I think it's reasonably unlikely. There might be one or two, but I wouldn't think a significant number of people would take the bus.
No, I think that was it for questions from me. Thank you. That's been helpful to explore those issues. What would be useful though, and I appreciate you don't have it to hand, and this may be something that's provided in the reply, would be have confirmation of the 0.5 rate that you mentioned as the published rate, as it were. Whether that's sort of for church buildings in general, or whether or not it's more specific to church services, and whether or not there is another rate which would be more appropriate to consider for the other activities. And I appreciate that you've confirmed that you're content in terms of the process you've gone through. I'd just like to have confirmation of what the published guidance or the published numbers on these things say.
Okay.
But nothing else from me, thank you.
So just while Mr. Harrison's vacating and Ms. Hayson is coming up, there was the question around the Balthama School methodology.
Yes.
So it is in Appendix 1, Table 4 to the Landscape and Visual Assessment.
Yep. Bear with me. That's actually I think the Landscape and Visual Assessment is in Appendix to Section 42A, isn't it? From memory.
Yes, Appendix
M.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So perhaps if we just check that is going to answer that question. So in the back, Appendix 1.
Yeah.
Table 4. So it's page 156.
Oh, great, thank you. Gone far too far already. Yeah, I have to admit the methodology bit is the bit I didn't read. 156. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've got page 156.
Right, so just in that table, so there's like a flow chart, figure 2, and then below that table 4, which has the effect rating down the left, and then the use of definition. So I think that's right, it's up on the screen now. So just to check, does that answer your question how the Balthamistical scale relates?
I understand the Balthamistical scale, but I'm just reading through this to double check that I understand how it relates to the RMA language, I guess. It doesn't specifically relate it to RMA speak, does it?
Well, it does use the word minor in respect of
Yeah.
below, but if I can check with Balthama School whether there's something that relates it more clearly.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to turn back on my notes and put this in the right place.
So I'll still round that out for reply, but
that would be really good if you could, please.
Okay.
So I'm just going to make a note of this. Yeah, okay. So I'm just sort of thinking about that a bit. Yeah, no, thank you. That's useful. I think it would be good if you could perhaps expand upon that a little bit over and above what I'm reading there.
Sure. Okay. With that, I'll pass over to Ms. Hayson for planning evidence.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good morning, Ms. Hayson. I've got your evidence in front of me, and as you'll be aware, I have read it. So yeah, if you could just take me through your summary and any other key points. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just briefly summarise my key points and then address some of the matters that have come up in questions and answer any others for you.
Thanks.
So in terms of the proposal, you've heard that the extension is to better provide for the existing activities, primarily through a larger auditorium for the Sunday service. And I just wanted to highlight here that the numbers, and that's where the conditions have come from, that were proposed in the AEE around number of people on site and the hours of operation, those have been based around my conversations with the church and their activities and looking to provide for those existing day-to-day operation and then the extension of the Sunday service. So I think there was a question earlier around were they reflective of what's happening on site now, and they are, is the answer, and also it's what I consider to be a more simplistic approach and more easily monitored from a compliance point of view than having all the individual activities in their hours and numbers, essentially giving an effects envelope approach. The activity is lawfully established on site currently and is therefore part of the existing environment. And it's the increased Sunday service size that's the key difference in operation, together with the increased size of building, that in my view are those key considerations. So in terms of section 104.1a, I've assessed the effects of the activity on the environment, and in my opinion there are two main categories of effects, and those are related to the increased scale of the building, and that's in the form of the landscape character and visual amenity effects, and also the flooding effects in relation to the Plan Change 27 matters for consent. And then the second category of effects are those related to intensity of the activity, and that's as a result of that increased congregation size and activity on a Sunday. And these are primarily derived, in my opinion, from noise, traffic, and a level of on-site activity. In summary, I agree with the reporting officer that the effects related to intensity, bulk and scale, transportation, noise, and flooding are acceptable. You've asked a couple of the witnesses around how that assessment of effects under 104.1a sits in the context of the objectives and policies. You're correct, the objectives and policies are reasonably narrow in scope, but the assessments that have been provided by the experts, primarily Mr. Clinch and Mr. Allerton and Mr. Harrison, have all, in my opinion, gone further than what those objectives and policies cover. And so I think the actual and potential effects have been given a wider assessment than just the scope of those objectives and policies. However, the context of what's acceptable is guided, in my view, by those objectives and policies, being they set the tone for that residential neighbourhood and the level of amenity that is acceptable under the city plan. So I think it's got to be, you know, they're intrinsically linked, those two aspects, and that's how I've undertaken my assessment with guidance from the objectives and policies. And so in terms of 104.1b, the key document really is the city plan, and I've also given consideration to other statutory documents, but in my view, it's the city plan is the key document, and the NPSUD is also relevant for consideration. And you asked Ms. Ham a question about that earlier on this morning. I have addressed that, in my opinion, on the proposal's consistency in evidence, and I'll just refer you to that section. So that's on page 22 of my statement at paragraph 58. Essentially my take on it is that the NPS is primarily about development capacity, but it is quite clear in the key, in my view, objective, which is objective 1, that what we're trying to achieve here is a you know, a well-functioning environment, and those are the words in the policy, that, and I quote, enable all people and communities to provide for their social, economic and cultural well-being, their health and safety now and into the future. And dwellings are only one component of that. And I think providing for social and cultural needs through places of worship and other community support facilities is clearly anticipated as part of that statement. And the church is already established on the land. It's not taking up a new site. And if they didn't do this development here, my assumption is that they would have to look elsewhere. And in my view, these community facilities are provided for and acknowledged by the plan as being appropriate in the residential zone.
Thank you. Was there anything else you wanted to run through?
I will just touch on the policy discussion around the transportation policies. There was earlier discussion around how that policy sat under the objective. That's 4B.3.1. My opinion is that the objective is broad and anticipates that parking could be accommodated on site or on the street. The policy is more refined, but I think that the wording of that policy, which talks about a level of on-site parking, is a qualifier, and that is essentially, in my view, saying that it doesn't say all parking must be provided on site, and I don't think they would use the terminology a level of if that was the intention. So I don't necessarily think it is at odds with the objective. And further, those objectives and policies, in my view, are relevant to the transportation network and are not addressing amenity effects. That's picked up in the residential objectives and policies.
Okay, could we just turn to that, please? I think it was in your evidence. I found the easy to read version of that, wasn't it? The
page 20.
Thank you. Okay, so just have a quick look at this. Okay, so yeah, so you're saying the context of that policy is very much the fact that the objective is talking about the transport network, Okay, and sorry, which was the residential policy you pointed me towards? Was the one that was considering the amenity effects?
Yes, so if you look at page 18, that's policy 14A.1.3.1.
Yeah.
Oh, it's coming.
Sorry, so we just had, technical.
Oh.
It's just the buzz. Sorry, we're just having some minor technical difficulties with that.
I've got 14A.1.3.1 up on my screen, so I have my own copy of
Okay, I'll just.
I'm looking at, so I have it in front of me. So do you want to continue?
Yeah.
So the I guess what we're seeing on screens glitching, is it, in terms of the document?
It's stuck, but that's okay. I have it in front of me.
Yeah, and I have it.
Yeah, I think this policy is where we look more closely at the amenity effects related to transportation, and whilst it does mention in Roman numeral 2 that it is, in part 2, that it is effects on amenity and the transport network, I think that the nature of the activities, actual and potential effects, will include those transportation effects as well. So it's two-pronged there, that you're looking at amenity related effects of the operation, which includes traffic and parking, and those effects on the transport network.
Yeah. Okay, so you accept that the parking of the vehicles in the local area can have an amenity effect?
Yes, I think it's something that needs to be assessed.
Yeah.
And I have done
that. Yeah, that's right. Fine. No, thank you for that. That's useful just to go through that again.
I didn't have anything else to cover off apart from, unless you wanted to go through anything related to conditions. I have suggested some minor amendments, possibly not necessary to go over them.
So shall we perhaps do that in a moment? If I go through any other questions I have for you first, and then we'll take it from there. So in terms of your executive summary, paragraph 8, where you say that the church is presently providing for up to 130 people, that's actually, from what I've heard earlier, is not a limit of 130. It's just the fact that it's been designed to accommodate 130 effectively. There's no condition.
There is no condition. I read back through the application, and it does, it's a very brief application, but it does have a point, which and I have it in front of me here actually, which states that the church will be, the auditorium will be for 130 people. So there's a reference, I guess, if it's referenced back through the proposal condition, but it is not a condition of consent.
Okay. Thank you. So I've got various highlights. So I'm going to double check that I've got. Okay, so you've already covered the MPS UD, which is one of my other questions. So that's good. I think a lot of these have been covered already. So just thinking about this whole issue of. I'm actually on paragraph 10 and D, where you're talking about the limitations on users at specific times of day, and I fully understand the logic of the approach that you're taking. I think one of the things that we heard about earlier was the ability, because of the increased space, was to have concurrent activities taking place. But you've mentioned that the figures, apart from the Sunday service, are pretty much based upon the number of users that are there at any one time at the moment anyway?
Yes, that's correct. Although they are the upper limit. So in order to provide some flexibility for those existing activities, not every day at the moment are there 60 people on site all day. But this provides some flexibility for the church to operate within with its current activities and with changes, and so it can flex and adapt, but within an envelope of what I consider, and based on the expert assessments that we've received, to be acceptable. And that's based around, for the daytime activities, it's looking at things like, what's the noise of those activities going to be like? Are those people going to be able to park on site? Are they going to be spilling out into the street? So it's how is that going to be managed? And in my opinion, any of those activities could operate at those levels proposed in the conditions there, and it would be acceptable.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's fine.
And I just to extend on that, I do note that there are only 3 evenings proposed for operation. So Monday and Tuesday till 10 p.m, which is to accommodate existing activities on those evenings, and then the Saturday evening. So otherwise, we've got 6 p.m. or 8 p.m.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So the just looking at that, so the Monday and Tuesday, that does that correlate to events currently that take place on Mondays and Tuesdays?
Correct.
Yeah. Great, thank you. I think most of my questions have been addressed, or issues I've highlighted have been addressed on the way through. I'm getting near the bottom of my list in double checking, so if you could just bear with me whilst I in terms of your and it's a planning issue related to noise, so I think, looking for your advice on this. You heard me ask the question earlier regarding, how do you manage people leaving the building at 10 p.m. who choose to stand in the car park saying their goodbyes for 10 minutes before climbing in their car? Do you think there's anything more we can do regarding that sort of issue, apart from the management that was discussed earlier in terms of, signage, etc.?
Oh, I don't think there is much more you can do, but I think it goes to the type of activity that's proposed, and also just the point that it is only those 3 evenings a week where it would be permitted to operate in the evening, and at those restricted numbers. So residential environments are not silent environments, and in my view, there's an anticipated level of noise associated with a living urban environment, and I don't think this is out of context with that. But But I do think that, making people aware, and because each of these groups are run by someone generally, so they're either run by the church themselves, or they'll have a scout leader or a teacher running the children's activities. There is somebody that can be responsible for, imparting that advice around being respectful to neighbours. Unlike perhaps a commercial activity where it's a little bit harder to control customers and the general public than it would be in this situation. So I don't, in actuality, think it will be an issue.
Thank you. That was helpful. Okay, yeah. It would be good to run through the conditions if we could now, briefly. One of my questions regarding the conditions has been addressed by that confirmation that it was it wasn't 2A, it was 19A, which is one of the things I highlighted. So perhaps I've been through these and content with them generally. Was there specific things you wanted to pick up, or just for me to pick up any questions I had?
The only changes that I've recommended, and they are attachment 1 to my statement, are around condition 8, which is the list of activities, just clarifying by adding that church services and religious activities are covered by those.
Yeah.
And the deletion of condition 10, which appears to not relate to the activity, and Ms. Pottage might be able to comment on whether she intended for that to be in there. And then in terms of the noise mitigation conditions, I do agree that condition 19 could do with a bit of work, and I'm happy to assist with that in reply, or with Ms. Pottage, if that would be helpful.
Do you think there would be any benefit in terms of picking up on that, the early discussion about signage, and it's another condition, not a variation of 18, whether there's anything that in terms of putting up signage in the building to ask people to be respectful of neighbours? And I appreciate it's not something necessarily, well, putting up the sign could be enforceable, but beyond that, it could be enforceable. But
look, I think it's all helpful, and it's not uncommon, and I've been involved in other consents where there have been conditions requiring signage to be erected, advising people to be quiet and respectful of neighbours. So it's not uncommon. It obviously can't control whether people pay attention to it, but it's just another mechanism for creating that environment, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't have anything else to say on the conditions unless you have questions.
No. So there was this construction noise and vibration management plan issue. So there's no reason that, in terms of my discussion earlier, no reason that condition 22 couldn't be applied. It's just purely a case that it's not a matter that any of the objectives and policies address. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's not, vibration is not dealt with at all in the city plan. However, you're quite correct that as a discretionary activity, the condition can be imposed, and I rely on Mr. Ellerton in terms of whether he thinks it's necessary to mitigate those effects. but I don't have a strong view either way on that, and it's certainly not my area of expertise.
No, that's it for me in relation to conditions. Thank you. So I don't have any other particular questions for you, but Ms. Han, was there anything you
No, so no further evidence from the applicant at this stage. I have just noted, obviously, the right of reply may be wider, but I've particularly noted that we need to supply a copy of the original application and existing consent, and that it would be helpful for you to have a better correlation between the Balthama school methodology and RMA terminology, and also the parking rate from Mr. Harrison around church buildings or church services.
Yeah.
So I'll make sure we come back to you on those as part of the reply.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for that. I've just made a note of those in one place too. Yep. Okay. So thank you for the evidence this morning and the assistance that you've given to me. And yeah, we'll move on to submitters now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who do we have first coming as a submitter?
Good morning, Commissioner. My name is Angela Gurnia, and I'm representing myself and my husband. We have lived in Maesbury Close for 23 years. We brought up our 3 children there, so we're very well established in the area. I'm just going to...
Could I just pause for just 1 second? Sorry, I didn't catch your second name.
Gurnia. Guernier.
So I'm just trying to find your original submission so that I've got that in front of me too. Great, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to highlight 3 points from our submission, and then I'm going to hand over to our son, Ben Gurnia, who's on Teams. He's stuck in Auckland,
Okay.
so he's going to continue on with that.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just speaking from a resident's layperson point of view for my 3 summaries. So in regard to the residential character and amenity of the area, we believe that the large-scale dominant structure, over 8 metres high and what will be 51 metres long, along the street frontage of Maesbury Close, is not in keeping with the established suburban residential area because of its bulk, the impact on the streetscape and skyline, and its proximity to the single-storey dwellings in Maesbury Close. The proposed planting can do nothing to mitigate the visual dominance of the building, especially from Maesbury Close. Neither can the proposed cosmetic adaptations of adding canopy or changing the exterior cladding provide any mitigation, in our opinion. Secondly, with there being a pedestrian access from Maesbury Close around the side of the building to the main entrance, it's reasonable to assume that the largest uptake of on-street parking will be on Maesbury Close. And we would also assume that both sides of the road will be used for parking, as there is nothing prohibiting this. This is of concern as the cul-de-sac is often used by children on their scooters and bikes, etc. The 1 point from the transportation assessment, which was done 2 years ago, just one little example, they identify 7 spaces for parking on Evans Road between Maesbury Close and Ella Place. But having we live in the area, and with all the stretches of yellow lines and bus parks, it seems to me that there are only 3 spaces. It's only a minor point, but just something to think about. The council notification report states that the proposal is not consistent with an expected residential character reflected in the surrounding low-density cul-de-sac streets, and actual parking demand of the activity cannot be met on site possibly. My third point to summarise is the applicant has provided no real evidence of need for the proposal. The existing church already features an auditorium, meeting rooms, activity rooms, a kitchen and a bathroom. It's unclear why these rooms need to be doubled up and built again. So why is a commercial kitchen and cafe required to cater for 180 people when, according to Tracy Hastings' applicant's evidence, the application only limits the proposed use to a maximum of 60 people on site, apart from 2.5 hours a week on a Sunday morning when they're asking for the 180. According to the applicant's description of activities, those 2 auditoriums won't be used concurrently, and it seems that the purpose of the building seems to be to allow the congregation to set up chairs for Sunday services and keep them set up, rather than having to set up and pack up for community groups who use the premises. So with the speculative nature of the hoped for 180-person congregation, no evidence of attendance rates and no evidence of additional groups looking to use the facility, the extension to the building does not seem to be justified or fit. The congregation who will be using the facility will not be the ones living with the 24/7 impacts of their proposal on the residents in the vicinity. So to clarify, we're certainly not opposed to the applicant developing the use and using its land for a place of worship. As I say, we've lived opposite the church for 23 years. As suggested at our meeting with the applicant back in February 2020, we would be happy to consider a smaller scale extension, not exceeding the height of the current roof line, a smaller footprint, and possibly a relocation of the extension, maybe so it runs parallel to Evans Road. This would decrease the visual impact, allow more privacy, and increase the car park space on the site, thus decreasing the impact on the residents in the surrounding cul-de-sacs. So can I just hand over to Ben? I can see his BG initials there, but yeah.
Great, thank you.
And
did you have some notes that you had prepared that you just went through, or was that from your original submission that you just presented from?
It was just like picking up on 3 of the points from our original submission.
I wonder whether or not we could have a copy of your notes, if that's okay. It's useful for me to have. I've taken my own notes, but there may be something I've missed, and
okay.
it was a nice summary that you just went through. So if I could have a copy, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Commissioner. My name is Ben Gurnia. I'm a beneficiary of the trust that holds 14 Maysbury Close, which is a property directly across the road from the proposed development. While I currently live in Auckland, I've lived at 14 Maysbury Close for most of my life, so I have a sound understanding of the area and the effects of the proposal on it. My parents, John and Angela Gurnia, and my brother Jeremy Gurnia, currently live there. And while my mum has spoken briefly about the proposed development, this submission reflects our submission and the views of John and Angela and Jeremy Gurnia. It also reflects the views of Natalie Gurnia, who is also a beneficiary of the trust. Today, I will speak to how we see the effects of the proposal on 14 Maysbury Close and on the area. While the full details are contained in the written submission, I would like to take this opportunity to speak to the key parts of that submission and respond to the points recently made by the applicant in evidence. What my family and I love most about living on Maysbury Close is its quiet residential neighbourhood amenity and character. This amenity and character is afforded by living in a small cul-de-sac characterised by open space and that is populated with single-storey freestanding houses. The proposal in its current form is not compatible with this quiet residential amenity. It will significantly detract from our use and enjoyment of the area. This is because of both the size and scale of the extension and the intensity of the proposed activity itself, which combine to establish a large commercial scale activity that ruins the quiet and residential character of the street. I'll briefly cover the key effects and suggest some mitigations that will, from our perspective, mitigate the proposal to an acceptable level. I would like to echo the comments made earlier by Mum. We are not opposed to the applicant making use of its land in a way that is compatible with the character and amenity of the surrounding neighbourhood. And before getting into discussing effects, I'd like to make a point on whether the existing activity should be considered as part of the existing environment. The planner for the applicant has stated that as the existing activity is authorised by the existing consent, it should be considered part of the existing environment for this application. In our submission, that is incorrect. While the activities proposed to occur in the new building are largely the same as the activities that are currently authorised, there is one substantial difference. That difference is that the new activity will be located in a different building, which is much closer to 14 Maysbury Close and other properties on Maysbury Close than the existing building. Because the proposed activity is occurring closer to the affected properties and receivers, it has the potential for much greater effects than the existing activities. This is because the current distance between the church and receivers, being roughly 80 metres, acts as a form of mitigation. The space is currently able to contain a large amount of car parking on site, and the distance to sensitive receivers mitigates noise effects. Now that mitigation is gone, the existing activity has the potential to have more pronounced effects. This means that the existing activities proposed to occur in the new building should not be considered as forming part of the existing environment. Now I'll speak about the specific effects that are of most concern to us. Firstly, the building itself is of a size, scale and design that is incompatible with the residential area. Maysbury Close and the section of Evans Road around the Maysbury Close intersection is characterised by single-storey, standalone housing and quiet residential amenity. The scale of the huge barn-like structure is significantly larger than anything nearby and will dominate the area. The shed was designed by Colour Steel, who are primarily commercial and industrial shed builders, and you can see this in the design. Features which makes the extension particularly out of place are the 51 metre long wall along Maysbury Close, the roof height of 8.4 metres, the monotone nature and angle of the roof, and the large roof area of sheet metal that we are exposed to on Maysbury Close. The canopy on the Maysbury Close is also distinctly non-residential in nature because of its size and boldness, which is 5.4 metres in height and 9 metres in length. It protrudes 4 metres from the building, minimising the mitigating effect of the setback from the curb. There is not a single house in the area that has these features on this size and scale with such a monotone industrial barn-like feel. Ms Hayson refers to the permitted baseline, saying that it is unlikely that the area would have remained vacant had the church not located at the site. Ms Ham notes that the objectives of Plan Change 26 are to allow increased density. While it is feasible and entirely expected that houses would be built there and that these might be higher density, these houses would look like standalone suburban style houses of much smaller scale. These houses would have different angles and lengths of roof and wall, providing diversity of built form and that residential feel. It is incredibly unlikely that a house, even higher density houses, would be built on the site that would have a 51 metre long straight wall and monotone sheet metal roof of this size. As stated in the LVA, the bulk and scale of the church building extension proposal is larger than that typically observed in the area, where standalone residential dwellings are the prevailing development type. The LVA states that there will be moderate visual effects from the northern side. From our perspective, the effects are much more than moderate. We are appreciative of the efforts the applicant has made to make the proposal more sympathetic to the surrounding environment with the proposed mitigation planting. Despite these efforts, we consider that this planting is insufficient to reduce the visual effects to an acceptable level. The planting barely obscures the building. The hedge is only 1 metre high, which is insignificant when the wall of the building behind it is 3.5 metres tall and the roof line is over 8 metres tall. The taller trees are too skinny and too few to effectively mitigate this giant barn and roof area. The Maysbury Close canopy, directly across the road from 14 Maysbury Close, has no planting mitigation. In our view, more planting is required to mitigate these effects to an acceptable level. We consider that if consent is granted, the existence and maintenance of this vegetation should be a condition of consent, and that larger plants should be used to ensure more mitigation while the plants are established. The roofline should be reduced in height, and the extension should be set back further from the site boundaries to reduce this dominance and provide more open space as provided for in Policy 14B. This development should also be rotated 90 degrees so that it is parallel with Evans Road. These mitigations would mitigate the worst visual effects by reducing the exposure and dominance of the large areas and shed-like feel of the wall and roof. Secondly, the proposed activity is of an intensity that is too great for a residential area. This intensity is characterised by the proposal to authorise large numbers of people for large events, up to 180 on weekends and 50 on weekdays, as late as 10 p.m. We are most concerned about the noise, traffic and parking effects from these large gatherings. We are particularly concerned about is the noise arising from the entrance that is directly opposite 14 Maysbury Close, and if consent should be granted, believe there should be a condition ensuring it is closed during events. The acoustic report undertaken by Marshall Day indicates there is a high likelihood that the application will breach city plan noise limits for residential zone land. The acoustic assessment model predicted noise effects where 50 to 100 cars arrive on site and the new building is used for singing and music. As demonstrated in Table 1 of the acoustic assessment, the upper limit for the predicted noise from this level of use is 48 decibels on 23 Maysbury Close and 44 decibels at 23 and 14 Maysbury Close. These predicted noise levels are very close to the planned noise limits of 50 decibels during the daytime and an exceedance of the 40 decibel limit should they occur during nighttime. The proposal allows a much greater intensity of usage than what was modelled in the acoustic assessment. Given that the modelling, based on much smaller usages, shows levels that will almost breach noise limits, we consider that the increased usage allowed by the application will likely result in noise effects and exceedance of planned limits. We also highlight that while noise from inside the building can be mitigated to some extent, we are concerned about the noise from people while they are outside. As the Commissioner noted, people typically congregate outside after events, and this will happen later in the evening where the effects are felt more greatly. The increase in traffic from large events in Maysbury Close will also contribute to the adverse effects on amenity, with increased use of the street having traffic, parking and amenity effects. The car parks provided are, in our view, insufficient to meet demand as required by the plan and will lead to people parking on Maysbury Close, particularly on Saturdays and Sundays. Small children often play on the street on weekends, and the increased traffic during events raises safety risks. Ms Ham noted that the proposal increases the number of car parks on the site. While the number of paved parks has increased, in practice, the grassy area is used weekly for parking. On a weekly basis, this open grass area is completely filled with parked cars. As this area will be built on, the actual parking capacity on the site is effectively reduced. Returning to the permitted baseline argument made by Ms Hayson, it is unlikely that should the church not have been built on the site, that the houses that would feasibly have been built there would attract 180 mates around for music events every week and 50 mates around it multiple times during the week. In any case, the council planner has recognised that there is no applicable or relevant permitted baseline when considering the determination of this application. Finally, it is the combination of these adverse visual and amenity effects that we are concerned about. While we view the individual effects as significant, there's also the cumulative effects from the size and design of the building and the events that takes the proposal well beyond what is acceptable in a quiet residential area. Other adverse effects we are concerned about are the flooding effects to 14 Maysbury Close and surrounding properties caused by building on the floodplain. And we're also concerned about the dust, sediment, vibration and noise effects from the construction of the building. I'll now briefly talk about the positive effects of the proposal. We recognise that the church currently provides a community function through the events that it hosts. However, the small-scale community activities are already allowed by the existing development at a scale that does not impose on the surroundings. As these existing activities form part of the existing environment, they cannot be considered as positive effects of the proposal. The only relevant positive effects of the development are those positive effects from the new activities that are enabled. This is solely increasing the size of gatherings from 130 to 180 and making it so that the church doesn't have to rearrange the space between activities. Neither of these are strong positive effects. The increase in numbers is purely speculative. The applicant has recognised this, saying the increase in numbers is hopeful and merely an aspiration. As we have discussed, this increase should also not be considered positive due to its effects. This leaves the remaining benefit as being that the church does not have to rearrange the space for small events. Having to rearrange the space has not prevented these small-scale activities from happening for the last 20 years. The applicant has not provided evidence for why this rearranging has suddenly become such a big issue for hosting events that a new building has to be built. As such, the new development cannot be said to enable these activities. If the development was declined, these activities will continue regardless. For these reasons, none of these effects should be considered as positive. The final point is that the extension is a very inefficient use of the space, with most of the rooms that are in the existing building simply being doubled up. For example, it is not clear why there needs to be another minister's office and another cleaning cupboard. These rooms increase the side of the building, but the applicant has provided no justification as to why they need to be doubled up. I'd like to make a short point on Plan Change 26 before commenting on the key planning provisions. While Plan Change 26 has been notified, it was suspended because the government is still working through the content of a bill, the outcomes of which has implications for what is considered appropriate density and the limitations on this. The hearings on what Plan Change 26 specifically means in the Tauranga context, i.e. the democratic process, have also not been completed. In other words, the outcome of these increased density provisions are very much up in the air. These reasons should inform how much weight the Commissioner attaches to the provisions of this plan change. I will now finally comment on the key planning provisions. Sections 14A and B explicitly protect the residential amenity of the residential zone. Policy and Objective 14B direct that bulk and scale must be compatible with the residential character and amenity. Moving to 14A, it is our position that the words smaller scale in Policy 14A.1.3.1